a missing royal heirloom, a sudden departure from London, a private estate at the center of growing speculation, and princess, and reportedly asking questions that others inside royal circles were reluctant to ask. According to a dramatic story now circulating across online royal communities, a series of unusual events allegedly placed Queen Camilla under intense scrutiny after an item connected to Queen Elizabeth II supposedly disappeared under mysterious circumstances. While none of the story's most sensational claims have been publicly verified, the narrative has nevertheless captured enormous attention because it combines secrecy, royal history, and one of the monarchy's most respected figures, Princess Anne. Royal controversies often become powerful not because of what is known, but because of what remains unexplained. According to reports circulating online, the story began with the alleged disappearance of a historic brooch associated with Queen Elizabeth II, a piece of jewelry that was said to carry significant symbolic importance within royal collections. Unlike ordinary valuables, royal heirlooms are often viewed as physical connections to the institution's history, making any claim involving their disappearance immediately attention-grabbing. And according to the narrative, what transformed the situation from a simple inventory concern into a major controversy was the suggestion that unusual circumstances surrounded the item's disappearance. One of the details frequently highlighted by commentators was the claim that security systems allegedly failed or experienced unexplained disruptions shortly before the item was discovered missing. Whether those reports are accurate remains impossible to verify publicly, but supporters of the story argue that such details make the situation appear more suspicious than an ordinary administrative error. Critics, however, point out that stories involving malfunctioning security systems often emerge in conspiracy theories because they immediately create an atmosphere of mystery and intrigue without necessarily providing any actual evidence. Nevertheless, the narrative quickly gained momentum, and that is where Queen Camilla entered the story. According to online reports, some observers became interested in descriptions of Camilla's alleged reaction when concerns about the missing heirloom first emerged. The story claims that while other individuals reportedly expressed concern, Camilla appeared unusually calm. It is important to stress that such descriptions come entirely from unverified accounts and should not be treated as established facts. However, in the world of royal speculation, perceived behavior often becomes just as important as physical evidence. That perception became central to the narrative, because once commentators began focusing on Camilla's reported reaction, attention naturally shifted toward Princess Anne. For decades, Anne has maintained a reputation as one of the monarchy's most disciplined and duty-focused figures. Royal observers frequently describe her as direct, practical, and deeply committed to institutional responsibility. Unlike more media-focused members of the royal family, and is often portrayed as someone who prioritizes facts, procedures, and accountability above public relations considerations. That reputation made her a natural focal point for the story. According to the rumors, Anne allegedly became concerned not simply because an heirloom had gone missing, but because certain details surrounding the situation appeared inconsistent. Supporters of the narrative argue that Anne's attention was drawn to patterns of behavior, timing, and circumstances that she believed deserved closer examination. Critics counter that such claims rely heavily on speculation and assumptions rather than verifiable evidence. Yet regardless of which interpretation people accepted, public curiosity continued growing. Because the story was no longer just about a missing object. It was about questions. Questions about timing. Questions about behavior. Questions about what might have been happening behind palace walls. Meanwhile, another development reportedly intensified interest even further. According to the narrative, Camilla allegedly decided to leave London and travel to her private residence at Ray Mill House during the period when questions about the missing heirloom were still circulating. Once again, there is no verified evidence supporting the dramatic conclusions often drawn from this claim. However, within the story itself, the timing became one of the most discussed elements. For many commentators, it created the next major mystery. Was the trip completely innocent and unrelated? Was it simply a routine retreat from public attention? Or was there another explanation entirely? According to many observers, that unanswered question is what pushed the narrative into a much larger controversy, because from that moment forward, attention reportedly shifted away from the missing heirloom itself and toward Princess and growing determination to understand what was really happening behind the scenes. According to many royal commentators, the reason this story continues generating attention is because it raises a question that no ceremony, title, or military appointment can fully answer. What happens after King Charles? While the monarchy remains firmly under Charles's leadership today, observers increasingly find themselves looking beyond the present and imagining what the institution may look like once Prince William eventually ascends the throne. That shift in focus has become impossible to ignore because every major royal event now seems to generate two separate conversations at the same time. The first conversation focuses on the current reign. The second focuses on the future reign that many believe is gradually approaching. And according to many analysts, Queen Camilla sits directly at the center of that transition. What makes the situation particularly fascinating is that Camilla's influence is closely connected to King Charles himself. Throughout the years, Charles consistently worked to secure acceptance for Camilla within both the institution and the public sphere. Every milestone she achieved was supported by his determination to see her fully integrated into royal life. From her gradual assumption of royal duties to her eventual recognition as queen, Charles played an essential role in shaping the position she occupies today. Because of that reality, many commentators argue that Camilla's authority exists within the framework of Charles's monarchy rather than as an independent force likely to dominate future royal eras. This is where Prince William becomes such an important figure in the discussion. According to many royal observers, William's future monarchy is expected to look different from his father's. While Charles has often been associated with continuity, tradition, and the completion of long-standing personal and institutional goals, William is frequently linked to modernization, efficiency, and a more streamlined approach to royal responsibilities. Whether those predictions ultimately prove correct remains to be seen, but they have become a recurring theme in royal analysis. As a result, commentators increasingly ask what role Camilla might occupy during that future era. Will she remain a highly visible figure? Will she step back from public life? Will the focus naturally shift toward Catherine as the next queen? Or will the institution gradually reorganize itself around a completely new generation of senior royals? These questions have no definitive answers today, yet they continue attracting attention because they touch on one of the most powerful forces within any monarchy: succession. Many analysts believe the public is already beginning that transition psychologically. Every time William and Catherine appear together, discussions about the future monarchy intensify. Every major engagement reinforces the perception that they are preparing for larger responsibilities. And every successful public appearance strengthens the belief among supporters that the next royal era is already taking shape. According to many commentators, this is why Queen Camilla's recent ceremony carried so much symbolic weight. What appeared to be a celebration of authority also served as a reminder that royal history never stands still. Every generation eventually gives way to another. Every reign becomes part of history. And while Camilla may currently stand at the height of her royal influence, observers increasingly believe that the larger story unfolding behind the scenes is not about where she is today, but about where the monarchy is heading tomorrow. According to many royal commentators, this was a stage where the story allegedly moved beyond simple suspicion and entered territory that made even some supporters of the narrative uncomfortable. Up until this point, the rumors had focused primarily on a missing heirloom, unusual timing, and questions surrounding Queen Camilla's reported behavior. However, once discussion began shifting toward Raymil House, the story suddenly became much larger because it was no longer about what had supposedly happened inside a royal residence in London. Instead, it became about whether Princess and was prepared to challenge one of the most senior figures in the royal family in pursuit of answers. That possibility alone generated enormous attention because such a scenario would represent an extraordinary development within modern royal history. According to the online narrative, and allegedly became increasingly convinced that the unanswered questions surrounding the missing heirloom could not simply be ignored. Supporters of the story claim that she believed the circumstances deserved further examination regardless of who might be affected by the outcome. Critics, on the other hand, argue that the narrative relies heavily on assumptions rather than verifiable facts and that many of the conclusions being drawn were based more on interpretation than evidence. Nevertheless, the story continued spreading because it presented a compelling conflict between two powerful ideas, loyalty to individuals and loyalty to the institution itself. That conflict became the emotional center of the narrative. For decades, Princess and has cultivated a reputation for placing duty above personal convenience. Royal observers frequently describe her as one of the most disciplined members of the family, someone who values responsibility, accountability, and straightforward decision-making. Because of that public image, many people found it believable that and would be willing to ask difficult questions if she genuinely believed important issues remained unresolved. According to the rumors, this determination allegedly created tension within royal circles. The story claims that not everyone supported the idea of looking deeper into the matter. Some individuals supposedly feared that escalating the situation could create unnecessary controversy, attract unwanted media attention, and potentially damage the monarchy's public image. Whether such disagreements actually occurred remains impossible to confirm, but within the narrative they play an important role because they transform the story from a simple mystery into a debate about priorities. Should institutions protect their reputation at all costs? Or should they pursue answers, even when doing so creates uncomfortable consequences? According to many commentators, that question became increasingly significant as attention focused on Raymil House. For years, the property has been associated with Camilla's private life and has often been described as a place where she can retreat from the pressures of public duties. Because of that reputation, the idea that the residence could somehow become connected to a royal controversy immediately captured public imagination. The more the story spread, the more symbolic the estate became. It was no longer viewed merely as a private residence. It became a focal point for speculation, a place where supporters of the narrative believed answers might exist, a place where critics argued nothing unusual would ever be found, and a place that increasingly sat at the center of one of the most talked-about royal stories circulating online. According to many royal observers, this was the moment when the controversy reached an entirely new level because attention was no longer focused solely on what might have happened to the missing heirloom. Instead, it shifted toward what Princess might do next, whether she would continue pursuing the matter despite growing pressure, and whether the search for answers would ultimately reveal anything meaningful at all. That growing anticipation is what transformed the story into a full-scale palace mystery and set the stage for the most dramatic claims that would follow. According to many royal commentators, this is where the story reaches the point that transformed it from an ordinary royal rumor into a full-scale palace thriller. Up until now, the narrative had been built around unanswered questions, unusual timing, and growing speculation surrounding Raymil House. However, supporters of the story claimed that Princess and eventually reached a stage where she believed simply discussing possibilities was no longer enough. According to the online narrative, she allegedly wanted answers. Whether such events actually occurred remains entirely unverified, but within the story itself, this decision becomes the moment that changes everything. The reports claim that and supposedly became convinced that the only way to resolve the growing controversy was to examine the situation more directly. According to the narrative, this immediately created disagreement among individuals who feared that escalating the matter could create a public relations disaster for the monarchy. The argument, according to commentators, was straightforward. Even if concerns existed, searching a private residence associated with a senior royal figure could create headlines far more damaging than the original controversy itself. Critics of the alleged plan supposedly worried that the institution could end up harming itself in the process of trying to protect its reputation. Yet according to supporters of the story, and allegedly viewed the situation differently. They claim she believed that unanswered questions pose their own risk and that public confidence ultimately depends upon accountability rather than appearances. Whether that reflects reality is impossible to know, but the idea resonated strongly with audiences because it aligned with Anne's long-established public image as a royal who prioritizes duty and responsibility above personal convenience. As the narrative spread, attention became almost entirely focused on Raymil House. The residence itself began taking on a symbolic role within the story. To supporters of the narrative, it represented a place where hidden answers supposedly existed. To critics, it represented the perfect example of how speculation can transform an ordinary private home into the center of a fictional mystery. Regardless of perspective, public fascination continued growing because the story had successfully created a powerful question. If someone really decided to investigate further, what would they find? According to the online narrative, this is when claims began emerging about a supposed search of the property. It is important to emphasize that there is no public evidence supporting the dramatic conclusions attached to these claims. Nevertheless, within the story, the alleged search becomes the centerpiece of the entire controversy. Commentators describe investigators supposedly examining rooms, reviewing belongings, and looking for anything that might explain the missing heirloom. What makes this phase of the narrative particularly effective from a storytelling perspective is that it creates uncertainty. For much of the story, nothing definitive is allegedly discovered. The search reportedly continues. Questions continue. Doubts continue. And the audience is left wondering whether the entire investigation might ultimately lead nowhere. According to many royal observers, this uncertainty is what keeps the narrative engaging because it places Princess Anne's reputation at the center of the story. If nothing unusual were found, supporters of the narrative would be forced to explain why such dramatic suspicions emerged in the first place. If something were found, then an entirely different crisis would begin. And according to the most dramatic versions of the story, that is precisely what supposedly happened next. Because as speculation surrounding the alleged search reached its peak, rumors began circulating that investigators had discovered evidence connecting the missing heirloom to Ray Mill House itself, a claim that would immediately escalate the controversy into one of the most explosive royal scandals imagined by online commentators. According to many royal commentators, the reason this story became so popular has very little to do with a missing brooch and much more to do with what the narrative supposedly represents. By the time the rumors reached their final stage, the conversation had expanded far beyond questions about a royal heirloom. Instead, it had become a story about accountability, trust, and whether even the most senior figures within the monarchy should face scrutiny when unusual circumstances emerge. That transformation is what turned the controversy from a simple mystery into one of the most widely discussed royal narratives circulating online. According to the most dramatic versions of the story, the alleged search of Ray Mill House eventually led to claims that evidence connected to the missing heirloom had been discovered. It is important to emphasize that these claims remain entirely unverified and should not be treated as established fact. Nevertheless, within the narrative itself, this supposed discovery becomes the turning point that changes everything. What had previously been speculation suddenly becomes certainty in the eyes of those telling the story, and the focus immediately shifts from questions about what happened to questions about consequences. This is where Princess Anne becomes the central figure. Throughout the narrative, Anne is portrayed not simply as a royal family member, but as the embodiment of duty itself. Supporters of the story argue that she was willing to pursue answers regardless of political consequences, media backlash, or personal relationships. Critics point out that the entire scenario depends upon a chain of unverified claims and assumptions. Yet even those who doubt the story often acknowledge why Anne was chosen as its central character. Her public reputation makes the narrative believable. For decades, Anne has been associated with discipline. She has been associated with responsibility. She has been associated with putting duty before personal comfort. As a result, many audiences find it easy to imagine her stepping into the role of investigator, even when the evidence supporting the story remains highly questionable. Meanwhile, another theme began dominating discussion: the idea of accountability. According to many commentators, the story resonates because it suggests that no position should place someone beyond examination. Whether people believe the allegations or reject them entirely, the underlying theme remains powerful. Institutions survive when public confidence exists. Public confidence depends on trust, and trust often depends on the belief that rules apply equally to everyone. That message became one of the primary reasons the story spread so rapidly, not because people necessarily believed every detail, but because people were interested in what the story symbolized. For supporters, it symbolized integrity. For critics, it symbolized the dangers of speculation. Either way, it generated enormous discussion. According to many royal analysts, the broader lesson may have little to do with the alleged events themselves and far more to do with the modern media environment. Today, a single rumor can evolve into an elaborate narrative involving investigations, hidden motives, secret discoveries, and dramatic confrontations. Once audiences become invested in the mystery, the story often grows far beyond the original claim. And perhaps that is the most fascinating aspect of all. Because regardless of whether the allegations are true, false, or somewhere in between, the story reveals how strongly audiences are drawn to narratives involving secrecy, accountability, and royal intrigue. The missing heirloom became the spark. Princess and became the investigator. Ray Milhouse became the mystery. And together, they created a story that continues generating debate among royal watchers around the world. What do you think about this extraordinary royal story? Do you believe narratives like this reveal genuine concerns that deserve closer examination? Or do you think online speculation can sometimes transform ordinary events into dramatic palace mysteries? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this remains one of the most talked about discussions among royal observers. If you enjoyed today's analysis, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of Princess and Queen Camilla, King Charles III, and the stories shaping the future of the British monarchy. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.